Thank you. Thanks, Amir. You know, men's ministry was mentioned a few times, and I do have to say that I don't know if you realize the quality of men that we have in this church congregation. It's incredible. It's actually off the charts. It's such a privilege to be able to be a part of a community of believers who are moving as one towards Jesus, and at the same time hearing as individuals and leading their families. And so it's really a remarkable thing. I just commend all of the men who really have taken leadership roles within the context of their sphere, as large or small as that is, but really have taken the initiative to move forward in their relationship with the Lord. And so nice job. We really appreciate that. It's a fun thing. We will have some membership breakfast starting back up here in September, so look for that coming up. All right, so we're going to get right into it this morning. The title of my message is Hope in All Seasons. And would you please just stand with me? We'll read my primary scripture. We'll read it out loud here. Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Yes, thank you. You may be seated. You know, our lives, they can be defined by many different seasons. And seasons have differing lengths, differing challenges, and differing resources available to overcome those challenges. And through all seasons, the power of hope is essential. Now, the reality is we have a lot of things that happen in life that can cause us to lose hope or question. Is there a God worth hoping in? You know, we've had a number of circumstances that have happened just recently. You know, we've had this flooding going on in Texas. It's catastrophic. There has been, a lot of lives have been lost. The media has kind of keyed in on, a Christian girls' camp where you kind of go, where is God in the middle of that? Where all these innocent children were swept away in the middle of the night. That feels hopeless. And I know that maybe touches real close to home for some. You know, we have other situations happening, just our neighbor here up in Coeur d'Alene, where we've had, evil seemed like it was winning. As a man sets a fire and then he starts shooting firefighters when they come to put it out. Where is God in the middle of that? Where do we hope? And it's back in the news again right now. We've had, almost 3 years ago now, we had, brutal murders over in Moscow. And that's back in the news because the killer, he finally has pled guilty. And so why does he get to pick? Where's hope in the middle of that? There's lots of things that happen in life, and those are things that are kind of happening out there, and they touch closer to home for some of us who may be more involved or may know people who are more involved, and it gets really painful. All of us have seasons in life, and we're all in different stages of those seasons, and there's a different measure of hope that is needed, and that's what we're going to talk about here this morning. So these are all good questions to say, well, where is God in the middle of that? Where is he in the middle of that? But if we allow our life circumstances to define who God is, then we are in danger of making some really inaccurate conclusions. We cannot let our life circumstances define who God is and his character. Instead, we cannot hope in a God who makes life easy, or hope in a God who makes life comfortable or free from problems, but we hope in a God who saves us from our sin. We hope in a God who redeems our lives and draws us to him. We hope in a God that promises that all things will work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So now this morning I chose this scripture in Romans as written by the Apostle Paul, and to his readers he's invoking a blessing. May the God of hope. May the God of hope. He's invoking a blessing to these readers and who would receive this letter from him. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace, so that you may be overflowing with hope. Not only is he invoking a blessing, but he's also making faith statements about who God is. He's also making faith statements about what the results of this hope will look like and feel like in your life. Now, I picked this from Paul because I think that he's tuned in to a unique perspective on the concept of hope. Now, hope is not unique to Paul. He didn't make it up. He wasn't the first one. It's actually been a part of God's people from the beginning. God had put it in the heart of man to hope for something more, to hope for something better. We all experience it. It's just sometimes we place that hope, the target of our hope might be something more temporary than God's intention of something more eternal. And from the beginning of time, man has hoped to be able to have fellowship with God, to be able to be in uninterrupted fellowship with him. And sometimes that gets messed up here on earth, but that's the target of our hope. Paul, in his writings, so in the New Testament, Paul wrote most of the books of the New Testament. In terms of volume, I think Luke actually is real close to maybe writing possibly more volume than Paul did, because he wrote 2 really long books, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And so that's, in terms of volume, was a lot, but Paul usually gets credit for writing most of the New Testament because he wrote the most number of books or letters. This word hope that we find here in Romans 15:13, it is the Greek word elpis, and it means to anticipate, usually with pleasure, expectation, or confidence. This word, it's used 54 times in the New Testament, and of those 54 times, 44 can directly be attributed to Paul, either in his writing or during the book of Acts where he was being written about, okay? An additional 5 are found in the book of Hebrews, which the author of Hebrews is not known. A lot of scholars think Paul wrote Hebrews as well. So a minimum of 44 were attributed to him, possibly 49 of the 54. So it's something that Paul uniquely has been tuned into and has something to communicate about. So this morning, I want to spend some time. I'm going to retell a story and also read it from Scripture at the same time. So it'll be a mixture of me telling and reading. It's found in Acts chapters 27 and 28. And this is a story about Paul. So this isn't what he's teaching. This is what he's living. Okay, so as we watch how Paul moves through this story of challenge, we can see how hope guides him. And hopefully, as we're going through this story, you can see yourself interacting in some of these situations that he's encountering. And you might be able to see, this is how my heart would respond in that situation, but this is how Paul's heart responded. How can maybe I grow and change? So my hope is this morning that you will tune in to how Paul can inspire you in your walk with the Lord. So before I get into that, just leading up to it, this is going to be found in Acts chapter 27 and 28. So if you have a Bible with you, or maybe you want to pull one up on your phone, it might be helpful if you want to follow along. I'm going to be reading from the NIV, and so that might be helpful if you pull that one up. It will just keep us all on the same page. Leading up to this story, the events leading up to this story, Paul is preaching the gospel in Jerusalem, and it's causing a bit of a ruckus in the community there, so he gets arrested. And he really wasn't guilty of any crime, so they were going to set him free, but then the Jews were kind of objected to that, and they wanted him to be punished, and so he ends up appealing to Caesar. And so in that time, that meant he needed to travel to Rome to stand before Caesar. Okay, so that's where this story picks up, and you might be familiar with this story. It's about Paul sailing to Rome, and we're going to get into it here, okay? So starting in chapter 27, it says this. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. They boarded a ship, and they were about to sail. There was an additional friend got to attend, Aristarchus, and he also was with us, is what he says. So with us. The us is, Luke is the author of this story, and so presumably he's with them as well. So it's Paul. He got to have a couple of friends. Now, keep in mind, Paul's a prisoner. Okay, Paul is a prisoner in this situation, so he's not going on a luxury cruise. Though he's a prisoner, he probably is under light watch. He wasn't considered particularly dangerous. Now, some of the other prisoners that were on this ship, it is possible they were traveling to Rome to meet their death by entertainment in the Colosseum. That's a possibility. So it doesn't mean that just because Paul's on this ship that everybody was in the same category as him, but he was receiving a little bit of different treatment possibly than some of the other prisoners who were apart. The next day they went on. In kindness, Paul was allowed to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. So as you can see, he had some freedom that maybe other prisoners did not receive. This is how the trip is starting. It starts out favorably. You know, at some point, God had communicated to Paul, you need to go to Caesar. You're going to appeal, and I want you to stand before Caesar, and I want you to share the good news in Rome. And so Paul knew, this is where I'm headed. And his journey starts out, and it's going reasonably well at the beginning. It's always nice when you start out walking with the Lord somewhere, some direction, and it goes well. That's helpful. It feels good. It goes on to say, as they were sailing towards Italy, we made slow headway for many days and then had difficulty arriving off of another coast. And when the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salmone, and we moved along the coast with difficulty. So you can see it's getting more difficult. There's some obstacles they're encountering. Nonetheless, it's still possible to move forward. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous, because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. Now, the important part about that was the calendar. So they were approaching the winter season when the seas are not navigable, and nobody would try to travel during a particular period of time. So they're trying to beat the storms, is what they're trying to do. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. Okay, so you remember Paul was a prisoner? So like when we read this story, we know Paul's the main character. We know he has authority. Leading up to this story, he's had authority in everywhere that he has been. But right now, he's a prisoner. So when the prisoner speaks up and says, hey, I don't think we should go, logically speaking, the men in charge are going to be like, yeah, thanks. We know you're just trying to delay your own death. Okay, there's really no reason that the centurion would have listened to Paul in this circumstance. Yet Paul is the one that had a word from God. And it doesn't specifically say right here that God told him this was going to happen, but when Paul says, I can see this happening, there's a pretty good indicator that he's tuned into what the Spirit is doing in his life. Nonetheless, the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. The centurion didn't listen to the man who actually is connected to God, but he actually listened to who would have been the experts. I mean, these aren't novice sailors. This is their job. This is what they do. He was saying, well, that's fine that you think that, but I'm going to listen to what the experts and the experienced people in this industry are saying. And in addition to that, since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should all sail on. So then he was just going to do what everybody else thought anyway. Okay, so we can easily find ourselves putting our trust into what the experts say or what the group or the masses are doing instead of hearing what it is that God is telling someone. Okay? Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should all sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. Now that's a long sail if you're going to get all the way to Phoenix. I'm not exactly sure how you do that. No, it's not Arizona. It's not Arizona, but. Okay, so when a gentle south wind, I'm moving on here to verse 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. And before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the nor'easter, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. And as we passed to the lee of the small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. Now, keep in mind, if you're Paul in this situation, you're saying, God is sending me to Rome. It doesn't seem like I'm going to get there. Shouldn't this be smooth sailing? Like literally, Shouldn't it be smooth sailing? Like if that's God's plan, right? If that's the purpose that he has, shouldn't he make a way? That's how we think, right? That's how we hope in a God who promises us comfort. But that's not the God of hope, okay? They're throwing the ship's cargo overboard. This was a strategic move. It wasn't whimsical. Like, we're going to die. Let's throw everything overboard. They were trained. This is how they were going to survive. Is they know, hey, we're taking on water in this storm. We're going to lighten the ship so that we don't go down. We're going to, potentially these things are crashing around as the ship is being beaten. Potentially they're creating hazards for the people who are staying on board. So they're creating a space that is possible to survive. This is life and death, and they know that. I spend almost no time in the ocean. I live in Idaho. And I like that. And so I don't go out on the water. Like, I love to see the ocean. I don't ever want to be in it, and I don't ever want to be on it. And that's okay with me. There's a little bit of a movement right now for people in Oregon. There's some counties that want to become a part of Idaho. And I think, hey, that'd be great, because then I could stand in Idaho and look at the ocean. That'd be best of both worlds, really. But I don't really think that's going to happen. But these guys, if you're out in the ocean and you are at the point where you need to throw your cargo overboard, this is a hopeless situation. They're not expecting to be like, hey, hopefully we get really wealthy on this trip. Hopefully we accomplish our goals on this trip. I hope there's some way we can survive this trip. This is a desperate, desperate situation. And it gets worse. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. Some scholars think that the ship's tackle actually had to do with the way that they would navigate the boat. And so possibly some of the masts, it would have been a sailing ship, right, that would hold the sails. So some of those things could have been more hazardous to have on the boat than off the boat. So like you would see, if you want to navigate your ship, you want to have those types of things. But if you just want to survive right now, we just need to get rid of it. It's that bad. Okay. And then it gets worse. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. If you're a sailor, the way you navigate is through the sun and the stars. Have you ever encountered a storm in your life where you had no idea which way you were going? It was impossible to navigate because you could not see the things around you. You could not internalize what was happening. You couldn't process what was going on fast enough as it was happening to you. This is what they're finding here. After many days without seeing the sun or the stars, they finally gave up all hope of being saved. I don't think Paul was immune to the fear of this situation. I don't think that he was sitting over in the corner going, I told you guys, this is what's going to happen. And just enjoying the ride. I think that he was included in this. Not that he was giving up hope, but that it was a scary situation. It was really fearful. And it probably raised a lot of questions. Like, God, we had a purpose. You were taking me somewhere, and it does not look like we're going to get there. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, Men, you should have taken my advice. Oh, here it comes. Men love a good I told you so. They love to be on the side of I told you so, not the receiving end. But hey, that's all right. You should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Well, how do you know, Paul? Oh, well, let me tell you. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, Do not be afraid, Paul. So he must have been afraid. He must have been afraid. It's a human response. Sometimes when we're going through storms in our life, it's going to cause some fear. It does not mean that we lack faith. It just means we have lacked a word from God in the moment. He must have been afraid. Do not fear, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar." The angel who's speaking to Paul reaffirms the vision that Paul had. He reaffirms God's intent in this whole situation. God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. So this is going to be good, but it's not going to be good. So just so you know. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. We don't know yet. We'll find out when we get there, right? So on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic when about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. It's kind of interesting. How would they sense that? They have spidey sense in there? No, these are experienced sailors. And I think one of the ways is the sound of the waves crashing against a shore sounds different than the sound of waves in an open ocean. And so I wouldn't know the difference, but they would. And they could tell how close they were getting based on how that would sound. So they sense this. They're still tuned in to this process. It's just a crazy, crazy situation. They sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. It's a process that they would drop basically a big weight down in the water until it hit bottom, and they would measure how far, like how deep the water was at any point, and then they would wait a period of time and then do it again. And if it got shallower, they'd know, we're coming closer to land. They would use all of this to navigate. It was highly skilled, really. So they took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. So fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, because as you get closer to shore, there's a greater chance that you're going to have some rocks, especially if you're in Oregon. Of course, they were sailing to Arizona, right? So I don't know. They were not sailing to Arizona. So, fearing that we'd be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. Oh, interesting. Now they're starting to pray. Who's all praying? The men on this ship. The ones who were, had just a moment ago, Paul said, the God whom I serve is the one who is going to bring us through this. So they start praying. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. Okay, this is really interesting now. So remember when Paul gave the centurion some advice? He said, listen, this is not going to go well. We should stay here. And then they sailed on. This time he said, if these guys want to live, they can't get out of the boat. You know what the centurion did? He said, okay, they cut off the lifeboat. The authority of Paul was beginning to grow because he's the one who had heard from God. He's the one that had a word. He's the one that was having faith. So people began to listen to him. Paul said, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you've been in constant suspense and have gone without food. That was high stress. High stress. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. Paul's really stepping into a leadership position here amongst this crew. After he said this, he took some bread, gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat, and they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. 276 people on this ship. One guy had a word from God. And that's the guy who he was able to affect the emotional response of each of the other people on there because he had a word and was willing to stand on it and believe in it and hope in the God who he served. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When the daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. That's how bad things were. Like, they were hoping to run the ship into the ground. That seems like a hopeless situation right there, but that would be better than the alternative. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. And then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. They're heading for it. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land, and the rest were to get there on planks or other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely, which is a miracle in and of itself. That's exactly what God told Paul was going to happen. Nobody is going to die, but they have to stay on the ship. And when the ship finally was stuck, and they all make it to land, 276 of them all made it through. And they are now, the first thing they could say is, where are we? This isn't Rome. We haven't made it to our destination. There probably was a little bit of reprieve. It probably felt pretty good to finally be on land after that ordeal. But at the same time, the reality of they don't know where they are, and they no longer have the vehicle that brought them there. Once safely on shore, I'm into chapter 28 now. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. It's inhabited. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. And they built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. So there's a little bit of a reprieve happening. They're getting some hospitality. The islanders are helping, recognizing these are a distressed situation. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on a fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. Like, come on. Really? Like, really? We just made it through this incredible situation, and Paul gets bit by a poisonous snake. Like, just when we thought things were going to start taking a turn better, we just got bit by a snake. Really? And that's what the islanders said, too. They were like, oh, he must be a bad guy. Because he's going to die. Let's watch this. He's going to puff up. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, this man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. That was a reasonable assumption. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire, suffered no ill effects, and the people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds. Said he was a god. So he just can't win, you know? It's just kind of rough sometimes. It's just not clear. Like sometimes when you have a word from God and you're like, I'm going in this direction. I really think this is the way to go. It gets a little rough and it gets a little confusing for everyone else around you. Okay. There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us into his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery, and Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with supplies we needed. After 3 months, we put out to sea. 3 months they spent on this island. After 3 months, they put out to sea. Now that was when the season actually had changed. They had waited it out, the winter season where the seas would not have been safe to travel, and so they waited the 3 months. During that time, apparently they were able to secure another ship to travel the rest of the way to Rome. I think that this little reprieve that the group experienced here on Malta could have been filled with a lot of questions. And they have this little interesting experience as well with this group here of these islanders. So church tradition will say that Publius, who was the chief official, was actually the first convert on this island of Malta. And as you can see possibly why, because his father was sick and Paul prayed for him and he got healed. And then many of the other people who in the group there who were sick came and also got healed. So I think that there was opportunity for Paul to share the gospel. And church tradition would indicate that is in precisely what happened. There's been archaeological digs that trace early Christianity back to this particular time there on that island. And so it would kind of indicate that. Some of the data would indicate that is actually what happened. And so it's just kind of an interesting thing. Don't you think that God could have said, hey, Paul, I want you to go to Rome, and on your way there, let's stop at another island called Malta, and I want you to share the gospel there. Oh, okay, great. No problem. Like, it could have gone that way, right? God could have made the path to Malta pretty easy. It could have been as simple as just, if you'll obey my words, I don't have to give you a consequence. It could have been as simple as that. But that's not how it worked out. And we don't get to know why. We don't, all I know is that human beings are complex. And when Paul started this journey, he started as a prisoner. In the mind and the eyes of all of the other people on that ship, he was just one of the other prisoners. By the time they got here to Malta, it would appear that he is potentially leading this group. It's possible that nobody on the island of Malta would have received anything that a prisoner would have had to share. But after having this whole group go through this experience where they had to rely upon Paul's faith and Paul's hope, where they were now looking to him as being the one who had the words of hope, the people there in Malta were following suit. It's just really interesting. People are very complex. And it's impossible really to know how all the intricacies work themselves out here. But Paul experienced a pretty dramatic detour in this journey that he knew God had him on, but he didn't know how long it was going to take and what all the detours were along the way. And it seemed like he was encountering some pretty severe obstacles in order to get there. So I have a few... I'm going to stop there on the reading in 28, and I have a few observations here that I want to discuss. And so as we're relating to this concept of hope, and we're talking about Paul and how he had this relationship with the God of hope. Not just he had a hope in a God that a God would intervene, but he was talking about the God of hope. And I have three observations about this concept of hope. One is it's possible to misplace our hope, to put our hope into things that aren't intended to carry that. So, for example, in Job chapter 4, verse 6, this question is presented. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? It's a good question. Shouldn't you, if you are living a righteous life, shouldn't that be what actually causes things to work out well for you? Shouldn't that be your hope? Well, if you have read the book of Job, you might know that this particular statement is given by one of Job's friends, and Job's friends are not given a lot of credit for having great ideas. However, this is an easy statement for us to believe. Yeah, as a Christian, I'm entitled to, or I deserve a certain amount of blessing because I am living a righteous life, and people who aren't living a righteous life, they shouldn't get that same type of blessing. Shouldn't your piety be your confidence? No, the answer is no. The answer is a firm no. Your hope is not in yourself. It's not in your own choices. Your hope is in God. Psalm 33:17, a horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save. Now, I personally have no desire for a horse. I think it's simply a very expensive pet, and I'm not interested. I had a job one time where I had to ride a horse every day, and I finally got to the point where I was like, I'm not riding the stupid horse. I will walk up the mountain. I don't want to ride the horse. That's because the horse was smarter than me, and it knew it. And if you ever ride horses, and when the horse knows they're smarter than you, they don't listen to you. Okay, so I didn't like that very much. So I personally don't hope for a horse. But in ancient times, why would they hope for a horse? Well, a horse might be a mode of transportation. It might streamline and simplify their work. It might give them an advantage over an adversary. A horse represented strength,
Today we might say, oh, if I only had a car. Or if I only had a more important job. Something that would give me some more strength. We might hope for those type of things. That will just make things a little bit better. It's, despite all its great strength, it cannot save. Psalm 62:10, do not trust in extortion or put your vain hope in stolen goods. Well, why would I do that anyway? Though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them. You know, how many times have you said, I just need a little bit more money? I just need a little bit more. Nobody says, I need a lot more. They always say, I just need a little bit more, which is fine. If you need a little bit more, no problem. You want to create strategies. You want to work a little bit harder. You want to be a little bit smarter. You want to spend a little bit less just to get a little bit more. That's okay. But the problem is in when you start to compromise things that are actually more valuable, like your integrity, like your relationships. You know, I can lie just a little bit just to get a little bit more money. Though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them. It's possible to misplace our hope, to put our hope into something that is more temporary than what God is intending. Okay? In addition, so if we're not supposed to misplace our hope, what are we supposed to do? Direct our hope. We get to direct our hope. We might slide into misplacing our hope, but the answer is to direct it, to tell our hope where to be. Psalm 130, verse 7, Israel, put your hope in the Lord. For with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. And Isaiah 40:31, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. In Jeremiah 14:22, it says, do any of the worthless idols of the nations bring rain? Do the skies themselves send down showers? No, it is you, Lord our God. Therefore our hope is in you, for you are the one who does all of this. The answer is to direct our hope, to decide where we're going to put our hope, to define who our hope is in, not just kind of allow it to happen and allow some of the targets that we might see here on earth, some of the temporary things to put our hope in that were never intended to hold our hope, but direct it towards the Lord. So we know what we're not supposed to do, we know that we are supposed to do, but what do we do when we feel like we have lost our hope? What's the path forward? We need to regain our hope. We need to regain our hope. In Ecclesiastes 9:4 says, anyone who is among the living has hope. If you're still among the living, there is hope. There's still a chance. There's still opportunity to direct it, to put it where it is intended to be. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. Now, I know some of you like your dogs better than your friends, and so that's another one of those scriptures that it doesn't mean the same thing today to us as it did then, but back then a dog was kind of a dirty thing and a lion was definitely a strong thing. So they're saying, hey, even a live dog is better. If you're in the land of the living, there's hope. And Psalm 42, verse 5 and verse 11, they say the same thing. It says, why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. I think as we're regaining hope, it's important for us to be honest with ourselves, to say, I'm feeling hopeless. This circumstances, this situation, this relationship, this challenge that I'm facing is making me feel hopeless. But just because I feel that doesn't mean that it is. Right. You know, Paul was sitting on a ship where they hadn't been able to navigate. They couldn't see the stars or the sun for days. They couldn't navigate. That could feel hopeless, but it doesn't mean that it is. Identify it, be honest, and say, why are you downcast? Oh, my soul, put your hope in God. Put your hope in God, not in being able to navigate, not in safety, not in comfort, not in my riches, not in some other person, but put your hope in God. Psalm 139:43 says, never take your word of truth from my mouth, for I have put my hope in your laws. So as we're endeavoring to regain hope, the target is to get into his word. Psalm 119:114, you are my refuge and my shield. I have put my hope in your word. And just like for Paul, as he was going through that whole circumstance that we read, he had a word from God. He described it as being visited by an angel, and the angel gave him a directive and assured him that things were going to work out in a certain way. And that's precisely how it went. He had that to grasp for him, to grasp and to hold on to pull him through that storm. Do you have a word from God? We all have his written word available to us. We all can look for promises in his word. We can grab onto those things and we can hold them and we can let them pull us forward. We can also hear, what is he speaking to our heart personally about it? What is it that he needs to speak to you this morning? Psalm 135 says, I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. In his word I put my hope. So this morning, no matter what season of life you find yourself in, maybe you are setting out on a journey and things are going quite pleasant. Or maybe you're experiencing some opposition. You've got some headwind. Things aren't going quite as smooth sailing as you thought maybe they would. Maybe you've gotten to a point where you're unable to navigate. And things and circumstances around you seem too confusing. They're making you question whether you were ever on the right direction in the first place. Maybe you've reached an island called Malta, where there's a bit of a reprieve from the storm, but it's not the actual destination. Regardless of what it is, think of the words of Paul. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. All right, with that, I'm going to let you guys close it down.